Hi guys, it's Dylan from Bijou Diamond Jewellery in London with another watch video, and today we're taking a look at the Rolex Datejust 36mm. Okay, so as with all my other reviews, let's go back in time and look at the history of the Datejust. So the Datejust was released, Rolex Datejust was released back in 1945, and it was a celebration watch to celebrate the 40th anniversary for Rolex. So it was quite an important model at the time. It really has remained one of their most important models in their collection, and really is, in some and to some people, is the core of Rolex. It is the real essence of their DNA. When you see a Datejust, people recognize it immediately as a Rolex. So in 1945 they released the reference 4467. At that time it didn't actually feature Datejust on the dial, and it wasn't known as the Datejust. It didn't get its name Datejust until the 50s, but it was a really important watch in not just for Rolex but also for watchmaking at the time. Featured a new type of movement that meant, in fact it was the first ever automatic movement in the watch industry that had a date function that could change over automatically at midnight. So it was an important watch in terms of watchmaking as well, which is obviously slightly unusual for Rolex. Rolex is more so has a focus towards reliability and durability rather than complications and improvements in watchmaking. Someone like Patek Philippe is someone who has more of a focus towards creating new interesting types of movements. So it was an important watch for Rolex at the time. Was pretty popular also. In the 50s is when it actually gained its name, like I said, Datejust in the 50s. And in the late 50s is when we saw the release of the 1600 reference, or 1600 series of Datejusts. And that really has been, or that model that they released back then, the 1600, really has remained as the essence of the Datejust. The watch has barely changed at all since that reference from the 50s, late 50s. It still remains pretty much identical to that now. Obviously there's some slight improvements to the movements, some slight improvements to bracelets and clasps, etc., to make the watch much more, add some modern features and clean up the design a little bit. But the real essence of the Datejust has remained exactly the same for 60, 70 years. Moving now on to the 70s, obviously a few other changes happened between the 50s and 70s, but the next interesting point that we're looking at is in the 70s, which is when Rolex updated the movement for the Datejust and created a feature where you could adjust just the date on its own rather than having to cycle through the hours of the day in order to change your date. And that kind of made the Datejust a little bit more famous as well, as it was incredibly convenient to be able to change the date and lended itself obviously to its name Datejust as well. Then moving on to 2009, which is our next big point in the timeline for Rolex's history of the Datejust. And that's when we saw the release of the Datejust 2, which was a 41mm variation of the Datejust. Previous to that, it had only been available in a 36 or smaller size. Smaller sizes being really for ladies, and the 36 was really the only option for men at that time, or previous to 2009. So Rolex recognized the fact that lots of brands were upping the size of their watches, and the audiences that were buying these watches, the consumer was looking for a bigger watch anyway. So they answered to the clients of the world and brought them the 41mm Datejust 2. That Datejust 2 didn't last so long. It was actually phased out a couple years later on, and then reintroduced as the Datejust 41 in 2016. The Datejust 41 is much more refined than the Datejust 2. The Datejust 2 was very big and kind of bulky, had much larger sort of dimensions and feelings, whereas the Datejust 41 looks much more refined and is kind of like more of a scaled up 36mm Datejust. So everything's in nice, much more nicely proportioned than the Datejust 2. So that concludes really our basic history of the Datejust. The Datejust that we're looking at today is the 36mm steel Datejust. It features the Jubilee bracelet and a smooth bezel on this one, which is classic for the steel variation. And this one features a really nice, beautiful blue dial. Arguably, the Datejust 36 is the most pure of all the Datejusts, as that was the size of the original Datejust they released, and has really remained the most important model in the collection for many, many years. The Datejust 41 probably now is a little bit more popular than the Datejust 36, at least for us at Bijou Diamond Jewellery, but the Datejust 36 remains one of the most important models in Rolex's collection. Okay, so let's look at some of the features of this Datejust 36. So we're going to start with the clasp as always. This is a slightly different clasp to what you'll see on the sports models from Rolex. This clasp doesn't feature a fold-over part to the clasp. Arguably a little less secure than the sports models, but obviously the Datejust models aren't designed to be, quite so active or, actively worn as the sports models from Rolex, like a Submariner or a Daytona, etc. This one's meant to be worn for more smarter occasions. So Rolex has not put quite the same level of security on the watch, perhaps because it's not designed for sports. But this one features a similar design to the Oyster clasp, just slightly more simplified, and it's all one larger piece. Obviously the end of the clasp where you'd have your fold over area usually looks like a fold over part, but actually just is spring loaded and like the inner part of a normal Oyster clasp. This one does actually feature a easy link adjustment, so you can extend the bracelet by 5mm in case your wrist expands in hot weather. Next, moving on to our bracelet, we've got our Jubilee bracelet, an absolutely iconic bracelet for the Datejust. I think if you're looking at Datejust, you should definitely consider the Jubilee bracelet. It is a fantastic bracelet. It's really the DNA and essence of Rolex. It's immediately recognizable as a Rolex. When you see a Jubilee bracelet and a Datejust, you know exactly what it is. I do really like the Oyster bracelets as well, and I prefer the slightly more understated look of an Oyster bracelet. But this looks really nice, especially on this 36mm Datejust. Definitely adds a much more dressy vibe, a much more obvious. It's definitely more obvious that this watch is an expensive timepiece rather than the Oyster bracelet. Definitely looks more sporty. This is probably better maybe for more dressy occasions, smarter occasions. I can see this looking much better with a suit. And if you perhaps wear a suit every day, or you go to a lot of smart dinners, etc., then perhaps this Datejust with the Jubilee bracelet is a better option than going with the Oyster bracelet. Moving now on to our case, we've got an all polished case. This one features our smooth bezel, which is polished finish as well. So we have a full polished case on this watch. Lends itself again to that much more elegant, classy look that this watch is trying to achieve. Really nice, elegant case. It is actually quite thin as well. Yeah, very nice classic design. Definitely not going to go out of fashion. It's just a beautiful, timeless, elegant case on this watch. Moving now on to our dial, we've got a beautiful blue dial, which is a sunburst effect. It's not such an obvious sunburst effect. You have to get it really in the right light in order to get that sunburst or that laser etching to really pop out from the dial. But it is a really nice effect. It's probably a little bit more understated than some other sunburst effects, but for my liking, I'd like to see a little bit more life to this dial than it provides. But nonetheless, really nice dial. We've got index markers on this one instead of Romans like some older models featured. We've got a nice white date window, really nice and legible, and we've got magnification also from the crystal for the date window on this watch, which makes it really, really easy to read. It takes up actually quite a lot of the dial. When you're looking at the watch, the date is actually a very, very prominent feature on this timepiece. Obviously, being a Datejust, that is kind of in the name, but it's definitely more obvious when you see it on this watch versus the 41mm, for example. This watch is incredibly legible. Yeah, really, really nice design. We've got white gold hands, white gold index markers, really nice details on the dial, Rolex logo at 12 o'clock. Just a very simple, elegant timepiece. Probably I prefer in terms of dial would be the silver dial variation of this watch. In fact, if we were looking at my whole personal preference for this watch, I'd go for the steel and white gold variation of the Datejust in 36mm, and I choose the silver dial with the fluted bezel. I think if you're looking at Datejust and you can afford to go for the white gold and steel variant, then try and go for the fluted bezel because it is really an iconic look for that Datejust. But nonetheless, I really do like this smooth bezel. In a way, the smooth bezel is much more understated than the fluted bezel. So for someone who wants to wear this every single day for multiple occasions, then definitely the smooth bezel is possibly a better option for you. And if you were to pair that with an Oyster bracelet, I would say that's possibly one of the most versatile watches you could buy because it's nice and small, very elegant, very classic, but it also adds a little bit more of a sporty vibe with that Oyster bracelet. But yeah, overall, a really, really, really nice watch. If I was to buy the 36mm, I would definitely go for the silver and fluted bezel and probably go with the Jubilee bracelet as well if I was looking for that much more dressy vibe. If I was looking for a more casual vibe, I'd maybe look at the smooth bezel like we have here, or I'd go for a Oyster bracelet with the Jubilee, with the fluted bezel and the silver dial. The reason probably why I'd go for a slightly lighter dial is because this watch is quite a small watch relative to today's standard at 36mm. Average today is kind of more 40mm, 41mm, so it wears quite small in comparison to what the usual watches that we wear, and therefore a whiter or much brighter coloured dial will help to make that watch wear a little bit larger and bring it up to kind of today's style and trend. Whereas a dark dial like this makes the watch wear a little bit smaller. But overall, I really like this blue dial. Really nice, elegant watch. Definitely will go with lots of the clothes that I own, because I own lots of blue clothes. And I know blue dials are incredibly popular and have been for the last 2 or 3 years. So a really great timepiece from Rolex. How does it wear on the wrist? It wears fantastically. I think it suits my wrist pretty perfectly. I think it probably would suit a range of wrists from maybe around 12, 13 centimeters up to probably, depending on your preference of how small you'd like to go with watches, probably about 17 or 18 centimeters wrist size, just depending on what your preference is, if you like small watches or not. An icon in the Rolex collection, Datejust 36, will live on forever, and this model is a fantastic example from Rolex. The great thing about Datejusts are you have so many options. You can customize obviously the bracelet with your 2 options, your bezels with 3 options, diamond, smooth and fluted. You can have so many variations of dials. So if you're looking for a watch that you really want to express yourself and choose the exact model that you know you're going to love, then look no further than the Datejust. It's a fantastic place to start looking if you're looking to build a collection with Rolex. Thanks guys for watching, and as always, if you're interested in this Datejust 36mm with a blue dial, smooth bezel and the Jubilee bracelet, then don't hesitate to contact us, or any other model in the Rolex collection. Our details are in the description and also at the end of the video. It'd be a pleasure to call this watch or any other watch into stock for you.